Since the FAQ dropped on Monday, the question I've been messaged the most to ask is, should I use Lore Familiar on my level 4 casters or in my army at all now that it has changed and I can't run it with my own faction signature spells? Now, I understand that it technically hasn't changed, and rules as written, you couldn't swap into your Lore signature spells as it was. However, in my experience, most people played it that you could, and most events played it that you could as well. So it is functionally a change to how the game is played, even if all they were doing was clarifying as a rules as written decision that didn't really sort of... The way to look at this is, first of all, the easy option. Do you have a signature spell that you really want to pick? Or are you picking a lore that has a very mediocre signature spell, but you want to make sure that you can get a good spell in there as well? So is the risk of rolling bad spells worse than swapping into a guaranteed great signature spell? Maybe. For some armies, such as Orcs and Goblins, if you've got a Goblin caster, you probably want to pick up Itchy Nuisance. It's a really good hex, minus D3 to strength and toughness. Obviously, that's an incredible debuff that you want to have on hand. And you may be less bothered about some of the spells in, let's say, War Magic, that you might dry roll. Second of all, does your army have a spell familiar? It might not be called a spell familiar. For example, Dark Elves have an item called the Tome of Furion. But what a spell familiar is typically, it's an extremely common item, although for the case of Dark Elves, and I think High Elves as well, it's not an extremely common item, so you can't combo it with other arcane items, and you can't take multiple of them across a list, which is a little bit of a limiting factor. But if you've got something that's basically called a spell familiar, it's usually about 15 points, and it gives you +1 spell known in the spell lore. However, it doesn't increase the wizard level that you're at. So you're still casting at a +4 if you're a level 4, but you know a 5th spell. Why is that important? Well, even before Lore Familiar, a lot of people were taking these instead of Lore Familiar because it was 15 points cheaper. Often it's an extremely common magic item, so you can combo it with one of the other really good arcane items that might be in your book. And it gives you the flexibility here now that we know that you can't take the Lore Familiar and swap into one of your signature spells. So, great example here, Warriors of Chaos. If you've got a Tzeentch caster, you almost certainly want to go for the Lore of Tzeentch. Blue Fire of Tzeentch, an incredible magic missile, one of the best in the game, if not the best. And if you're saying rolling on battle magic, it's better to roll 5 spells and lose 1 and definitely get the good magic missile, because if you're fishing for the damage spell specifically, I'd argue that Blue Fire is on par or better than both of the damage spells in battle magic. So the small risk of losing one of those two is worth the guaranteed getting Blue Fire as each, as opposed to picking Pillar of Fire and Fireball and then losing out on the ability to take that really good magic missile. Thirdly, we want to look at the arcane items available to you. Do you have something that's just, first ballot Hall of Fame? Are you going to be taking Oaken and Stave on your level 4 every time? That's how I was playing my Wood Elves, and it's how I'd probably continue to play Wood Elves. It is nice to have the reliability of the spells, but sometimes the benefit that you get from taking a different arcane item is just so strong that it's worth taking above anything else. Previously, Infernal Puppet and Oaken Stave are the two that really jump out to me, but now that you can't take the Lore Familiar and take a signature spell, has that changed a little bit? We'll go through and look at all of the different armies and see if there's anything in there that really jumps out that you might want to consider more that you hadn't before. And obviously, again, if you can take a spell familiar, the decision on whether you take an arcane item that's not Lore Familiar becomes much easier, in my opinion. Last but not least is, how many casters are you running? If you're running a pair of level 4 casters, I wouldn't be surprised if you take Lore Familiar on one, even if you've got really good casters, really good signature spells. It's just something that having that flexibility and reliability is worth doing. It's not going to be the case every time, but I think the more casters you run, the less other options are appealing over the Lore Familiar, and you might want to dip into them and take those items. We'll see. First things first, is there anything in the main core rulebook that I would take over a Lore Familiar? I think probably not really. There is an item here that's worth talking about, something that I have seen people discuss, and that is the Arcane Familiar. So if you are playing an army that doesn't have good signature spells, previously, something that you might have done, if you had access to, let's say, Battle Magic and Demonology in the case of Empire, you might have taken an Arcane Familiar, taken 1 spell from Demonology, so you can swap into the signature spell there, which is a great magic missile, and then roll 3 spells in Battle Magic. This doesn't appeal to me because it is quite risky in terms of getting the spells that you want. You're only rolling 3 dice across 6 spells. There are a couple of stinkers in battle magic depending on how your army's set up, but it is one of the options available to you, and it is sort of a backdoor to still getting, both the battle magic spells and then a good magic missile as well. Not as reliable, but if you can combo this with a spell familiar that is, an extremely common magic item, and you also don't have access to a good magic missile within your spell lore, I'm not sure if there are any armies that applies to, this is something you can go for. But for Empire players, this might be a combo that you want to look at. Take 3 spells in battle magic, 1 spell in demonology, roll 3 spells, hopefully get Arcane Urgency, Pillar of Fire, and the Fireball as well, and then take the Arcane Familiar. Jobs are good in there. First up, for the armies that we're looking at, we've got Dwarves. Should you play Lore Familiar with your Dwarf army? No. I refuse to expand further. Next, and first the armies that can actually bring spellcasters, we've got Empire. Should you bring a Lore Familiar for Empire? Well, let's have a look at their signature spells. Okay, we've had a look at their signature spells. There's nothing there. And what other arcane items do they have that can really give them options? So if you look down the core rules, the ones that come in the Force of Fantasy, I don't think any of these items are worth taking over a Lore Familiar. Obviously, the Familiar and the Staff are both extremely common, so you could run them at the same time if you wanted to. But when we go into their Arcane Journal, we have got a little bit more of an option. In my opinion, Empire players have an item that is better than Lore Familiar, as long as you're willing to go down a slightly more specific path. So you can't combo this with Battle Magic, which is obviously one of the best lores in terms of arranged output. But there is the Tome of Midnight, 30 points. It gives you +1 to cast, and an additional spell, as long as you're casting from the lore of Demonology, Dark Magic, or Necromancy. This is great. You can't cast spell like a 5th spell. You can only cast the number of spells equal to your wizard level. This is fine because you're rolling them separately and you don't have a lore to swap into, although you probably take Demonology if you want the magic missile there. You can't then combo it, so you can't go, I'm going for the additional spell and casting all 5. However, you do also get the loner special rule. So there are situations where you would take Lore Familiar over this if you wanted to have a Demonology caster to buff up a unit that they're in. Infantry's not great at the moment, but I could see you putting a maybe Knights of More army together where you can take the level 4s, take a Lore Familiar, take a Demonology caster in there, and really turbocharge the Knights, make them hit quite hard. So in that case, I'd take the Lore Familiar and have the reliability. But if you want to have a standalone wizard, Tome of Midnight is fantastic, and you can combo it with the extremely common magic items, such as the Wizard Staff from the previous book. I really like having a Wizard's Familiar. Having 5 spells, knowing 5 spells, casting it +5, and also dispelling it +5 from the Wizard's Familiar. I think this is an extremely powerful build. You do have to run them solo, so you're probably putting them on a Pegasus, but it's a good package all round. Moving on to Bretonnians, and we've got our first actual signature lore of magic. We've got 3 spells in here, and I would say Bretonnian spells are worth considering. They're not so good that I would take them every time, but they're good enough that I would consider taking them. Mostly in my eyes for the Lady's Gift or the Lady's Wrath. You can take Burning Gaze, but now that you can't take Battle Magic, pick your spells and then go into Burning Gaze, I'm a little more leery on that. So, spell-wise, Lady's Gift, this is a regeneration, 6 up or a 5 up if you cast it on a 10+. It's a flexible casting, which means you're pretty reliably going to get it off. You only need to roll it on a 3 if you're casting it, from a level 4. And you can get it on the better value if you cast a 6. So, all good stuff there. Lady's Wrath is the other one that's obviously good as well, which remains in play. Gives them +1 to Strength and AP. So this is kind of like the Demonic Vigor spell or Demonic Vessel from Demonology, which gives you Strength, AP, and attacks. Moving on to the magic items, but before I should make a note that sometimes you won't even want to take a level 4 for Bretonnia. The points are very tight if you're playing Bretonnia, and sometimes you're just going to want to go, okay, let me take the Green Knight, a Baron, a Duke, and maybe squeeze a Paladin in. I'm not sure how the points quite spin out on that, but you might not take them. Or you might be taking Exiles, at which point you can't take a Prophetess. You can only take a level 3 Wizard. The Outcast Wizard is still pretty fine, but Bretonnian is an army where you might not take a Spellcaster at all. And obviously at that point you wouldn't be taking a level 4 with Lore Familiar. Looking at the magic items, Is there anything on here that I think you might want to take over Lore Familiar? And I actually think there is. I think Prayer Icon of Quenelles is really good. At 25 points, you increase your dispel range by 3 inches. This is going to be a theme. These are the items that I'm going to say this is something that you should consider taking over Lore Familiar, especially now you can't combo it with your signature spells. But it gives you plus 3 inches to your dispel range, and you get +1 to dispel against hex spells specifically. This is a very strong combo. It gives you more defense. Typically with Bretonnia, what you're looking for is magic defense in my eyes. I don't think you necessarily want ranged output from Bretonnian. It's nice to have, but you can take a Ruby Ring of Ruin. Mostly it's to semi-buff up your units, make sure they get into combat, and then when you hit, make sure there's nothing stopping you, like a Miasmic Mirage or a Column of Crystal. So having the extra range and having the extra dispel against the things that might stop you getting into combat is quite... There are 2 items that I think you might want to lean into if you're playing Bretonnians that would stop you from taking Lore Familiar. Obviously, the first is the one I've just spoken about, but the second is the Flame Strike Wand. If you want to go for a more ranged output build, you might go for a level 4 Battle Magic caster with the Lore Familiar, or a level 3 if you're an Outcast Wizard. And then it might be worth taking the Flame Strike Wand as well on a secondary caster. If you're, playing Exiles, you might have a pair of level 3 Outcast Wizards, one of them with a Flame Strike Wand, one of them with the Ruby Ring of Ruin, and you might be trying to just squeeze as much range damage out of them as possible to complement the rest of your army. I think that's something that's definitely worth doing. But also you can look at the special character that comes in the Arcane Journal, which would obviously prevent you from picking the Lore Familiar. In my eyes, Lady Elise Tashard is a reason not to pick the Lore Familiar. If you're looking for the best magic defense, you can go for the Prayer Icon of Quenelles. However, you could instead take Lady Elise. She's only a level 3 caster, but she dispels at +4 because she's got a special rule here for Arcane Backlash. But also, if she dispels on a double, she automatically dispels any spell, with the exception for a double 1. So if you roll a double 2 and your opponent cast it on, an 11 on the dice and a +5, sucks to be them. You rolled a double, you've dispelled the spell. So I think now that Lore Familiar's changed, this is a caster that's definitely worth taking a second look at. She's one of the few special characters in the game that I look at and go, oh, this could make the top 10. On to the Wood Elves, and now we've got 2 very mediocre signature lore spells, but we've also got one that's absolutely fantastic. Flock of Doom is a pretty poor magic missile. The way that templates work now with the bigger base sizes and the partial hits, it really doesn't do very much. Forest Walker, yes, you can theoretically teleport a model around the board, but it's super limited. It's only into woods, and it can't be within 6 inches of enemy models. So if you pick this spell, your opponent knows you have it. They can just put 1 model or 1 unit in a wood, and then suddenly you can't use your spell at all. However, Tree Singing, this is fantastic. This is, in my opinion, one of the core methods to playing Wood Elves, because you really don't want to get hit back. You're very squishy, you hit quite hard, but you've got to do it and make sure that you're not getting, punched back on the backswing. So, Tree Singing, cast on a 7 or a 9, 15-inch range. It's a vortex that doesn't move. You put it down and it makes a forest, either a 3-inch or a 5-inch template. What does this do? It's dangerous terrain. It blocks line of sight. It's just very solid in terms of slowing down your opponent and getting to you, or stopping them from shooting you back or casting spells at you, all of that good stuff. Obviously, it remains in play, so your opponent then can have a chance to dispel it before they get to their shooting phase. With that in mind, do I think there are any items that are worth taking over a Lore Familiar? And I'd say absolutely yes. Even before, when you could have theoretically taken a Lore Familiar and picked your signature spell, I was taking the Oaken Stave. This thing is a beast. I've mentioned it before, but if you're within 3 inches of a woodland terrain feature, which is very easy to do because you can cast your own woods, and you bring your own wood as a Wood Elf player as well, so you've got a lot of flexibility here. You increase your dispel range by 3 inches, and while within 3 inches, you roll an extra d6 while dispelling and discard the lowest. This means you're almost never going to be outclassed in the arts. You have to roll a triple 1, which is a 1 in 216% chance, which is like a 0.047% chance or something like that, to put it into context. But also, rolling 3d6 and dropping the lowest is something like a +2 to your roll on average, which changes the maths, where normally when you're trying to dispel, you're at a disadvantage to your opponent, but with the Oaken Stave, you are at a mathematical advantage. on average. Obviously, if they've rolled a double, a 5 and a 6, it's going to be a little difficult for you. But sometimes you'll get that triple 6 or the double 6 and a 1. Who knows? The other thing that you normally take, or have often taken with Wood Elves, is you've got your level 4 caster, who's got the Oaken Stave, and then you've got a level 2 caster as well, who's in the same lore with Lore Familiar. I really like this because it gives you the flexibility to pick up a spell that you really need. In my eyes, Arcane Urgency is an absolutely huge spell for Wood Elves. You are playing a game where you really don't want to get caught, so if you can use that to get out of dodge, it's very strong. So I typically like a level 2 with a Lore Familiar and a Power Scroll. You're not going to be able to take Tree Singing here. Is that a problem? I think it's probably still fine, because often there are 2 spells in the lore that you want to go for that you're still going to take. Now that you can't take Pillar of Fire alongside, with the Sisters of the Thorn, I might still go for the level 4, level 2, both in Battle Magic, roll my spells on the level 4 with the Oaken Stave, and the level 2 is going to pick Fireball and Pillar of Fire or Arcane Urgency if I didn't get it on the level 4. That's probably the setup that I'm building around early on. I think I'm going to look at more Wood Elves in detail on Friday's stream, so if you're interested, do check that one out. But for now, I'd say, yeah, I think there are reasons to take Lore Familiar, but if you're only taking a single caster, Oaken Stave. Finally, for the Forces of Fantasy, we've got High Elves, and this is an army that I'm going to be looking at a lot more over the coming months, I think. I'm really excited to play around with them, and things might change with the Arcane Journal. But as it stands, we've only got the Forces of Fantasy book, so would I recommend taking Lore Familiar for High Elves currently? Well, looking at the signature spells, there's not anything in here that super wows me. There are things that you can pick if you want to play around it, but I don't think there's anything in here that would stop me from taking Lore Familiar on the spells alone. Hand of Cain is an incredibly mediocre assailment spell. A single strength 4 hit with no armor save allowed is not particularly great. Courage of Venarian, giving them an Unbreakable is all well and good, but it's a remains in play spell. So if you cast it on a brick, say a unit of Phoenix Guard, they are set to receive a charge, and then your opponent casts, dispels it because it's a remains in play spell, and you then lose the ability to be unbreakable. So I'm not in love with Courage of Venarian. I think it's a fairly mediocre spell. Vol's Unmaking. This is maybe a controversial one. Some people like it, some people don't. I don't particularly like it. I think if your opponents let you get within 12 inches in the command phase, so before you move, of their high value target to cast this, and then it's cast on 11, a lot of high-value targets, such as the Chaos Dragon Lord, have Magic Resist, so Magic Resist 2 on the Dragon Lord. Casting on 11 at -2, it's difficult. You're also definitely going to be in range of their Dispel Threat as well if their opponent's playing well. I'm not impressed by Vol's Making. If you like it, if it works for you, fair play. Looking at the magic items for High Elves, there's actually 2 options in here that are kind of Lore Familiar adjacent. We've got the Anulian Crystal, which allows you to cast a spell. After you cast it, forget the spell, roll a new spell, which can be the old spell, and this gives you the option to get into spells that you didn't have at the start of the game. This is interesting. I'm not sure that I'd be taking this one myself, but it is fun, and it theoretically allows you to cast 5 spells in a turn, which is something. Also, there's the Silvery Wand. This is the Lore Familiar that I was talking about, and this is 15 points, plus 1 spell than you normally would be able to cast, so you can cast at 5 spells at level 4, but you still cast at a +4. This doesn't have the extremely common tag, so you can't combo this with other arcane items, which maybe not the end of the world for High Elves. For me, High Elves come down to how many points do you have, because you're obviously going to be looking at taking Expensive Dragon, or you're very likely going to be looking at taking Expensive Dragon. Maybe you want to try and fit 2 dragons in. Points can get very squeezed, and while I don't necessarily think that the Silvery Wand is super worth it for High Elves, because you're not really looking at taking one of those signature spells, if it lets you fit it in the Seed of Rebirth, as well as maybe a Talisman of Protection that you wouldn't be able to take, I would absolutely go with the Silvery Wand over the Lore Familiar, but this is just a case of fitting the points into your 1,000-point cap. So I'd say for High Elves, it varies. If you really need the spells, take the Lore Familiar, and if you squeeze on points, you can comfortably go down the Silvery Wand without too much risk. Over to the Ravening Hordes, and we have the first book where I'm a little bit conflicted, honestly. Orcs and Goblins. There are 2 signature laws, one for Orc casters and one for Goblin casters. Orc casters, I think, their signature spells are fine. They're not particularly exciting, but they're okay. They've got an assailment spell and they've got a magic missile. Neither are super exciting. Brainburst is probably the better one, a strength 6 hit with no armor or regen saves and D3 multiple wounds. Into some matchups, that's really nice. Gaze of a Gork is a 5d6 inch strength 5 hit AP3 line magic missile. Again, this is fine, and there are some matchups where it's probably better than others, but I'm not super excited about it, especially because it means that you've got to get into a particular angle to use your caster, which might be detrimental, and you might put yourself in harm's way. So if you've got an Orc caster, I'm kind of less bothered about these two. However, when we get to the Goblin casters, we've got Mork's Cursed, which is a debuff to armor saves. They have to reroll successful 6s on their armor save. That's fine. I haven't seen anyone pick it, because Itchy Nuisance is so good. It is minus D3 to your toughness and initiative. I think I said strength earlier, I meant initiative. It's a hex. It's a 9-inch, cast on a 9, so 15-inch range hex, which is lower, but it's the sort of bottom end of where I think I'm willing to take it. But it's so powerful. You can drop a dragon down to T3, for example. Obviously, if you're looking at running Fanatics, for example, or a big poison shooting brick, dropping them to a point where they can be wounded pretty comfortably is really nice. Or even just having it in general, dropping those Chaos Warriors down to toughness 1 because you rolled well is really scary for them. So I would say if you've got a Goblin caster, I'd definitely be looking at this over Lore Familiar, because what you bring is so good. So saying that, looking at the arcane items, is there anything that I'd pair with a goblin wizard that doesn't want to pick their spells? And I should make a note here. If you're playing the teleporting shooting brick, where you use TMP to take a big unit of, say, 90 goblins to teleport around, that caster probably needs Lore Familiar. However, you can take unlimited level 4s if you're playing Orcs and Goblins. You're capped to 2 at 2,000 points if you're taking Orcs, but the Goblin casters are not capped at all. So theoretically, you could take, even if you're playing Rule of 3, 2 Orc casters, 3 Goblin, 3 Night Goblin. Obviously, you overcap on points at that level, so it doesn't become a problem, but you have as many level 4s as you want to fit into your list, and it's really only constrained by how much other good stuff you want to put in there. So arcane items, glittering whatnots, I think is interesting. This is not something that you take because you expect to want to roll the 4-up. This is something that you take because you hope that your opponent doesn't try and cast spells at you. So you put it on a Death Star and you dissuade them from trying to cast things. Am I taking this? Probably not, but it's a cool item. Buzz Gob's Knobbly Staff, 35 points, reroll 1 casting roll. This looks fine on paper, but there's a better item in the Arcane Journal, so we can leave this one. Idol of Morg. This is probably going to be my go-to for Orcs and Goblin players. If you're running especially a second caster and you want to take Itchy Nuisance with them because it's a Goblin, look at Idol of Morg. This gives you +3 to your Dispel range. I mentioned before, this is one that we really like. And you get to re-roll a Dispel attempt. This doesn't include if you are outclassed in the art, so if you roll a double 1, but it gives you a much higher chance of getting that really important spell stopped because you've got 2 chances to do it instead of 1, which is obviously very good. Over to the arcane items, and you've got the Idol of Gork, which is the item I alluded to. It's +3 range to your spells, and you get to reroll a casting roll once per turn. So this is kind of cool if you want to take the Orc caster with the Gaze of Gork. Suddenly your line spell is 5d6 +3, which is a little bit more consistent. But yeah, I really like this. I think if you're looking for something just to buff up your casting rolls, definitely worth looking at. And other than that, I'm not super impressed. You can take the Staff of Badum. If you roll any double 1s or double 6s, you get a 5-inch blast template over the bearer. So I probably wouldn't combo this with, a caster that goes in a unit. But if you wanted to put, I don't know, an Orc Shaman on a Wyvern, this is something that might be fun to look at because it gives you a lot of additional casting. So maybe this is worth looking at over Lore Familiar. And it would be, if you're looking to take maybe a Blaster caster on a Wyvern, which is a fun but slightly suboptimal build. There's also, in this book, a level 3 caster that I would recommend picking if you're playing a very specific army, Troll Horde. You can take him outside of Troll Horde, so if you're playing Trolls in general, maybe it's worth looking at, but I think Troll Horde is the place to take Ogdras. And would I take Ogdras instead of a Lore Familiar? Well, Ogdras has Lore Familiar on his magic item sheet. So you can't take him instead. You might take him and just be like, well, I get it. In his case, I think he's a really good Lore Familiar bearer. He picks from 2 spells known. The wording on it means that you pick from both laws. You don't pick between them. You just pick between the 2. So often you're going to, and again, you only are a level 3 caster, even though you're casting at +1 if you're near trolls. Often you're going to be taking something along the lines of Big Smarts from Troll Magic, and then Plague of Rust and Ravenous Recourse. So there's enough spells in here that it really doesn't matter that you're taking Lore Familiar. You're never going to get down to those signature spells. There's so much good stuff between the 2 laws of magic and only 3 spells known. Next up, we've got Warriors of Chaos, and Warriors of Chaos, I think, are a really interesting one. This is one where you've got the most decisions to make as to what you're going to do. Their Law of Chaos, well, it is a Law of Chaos. Their signature spells, they've got 4. 1 for each mark of chaos that can take a caster, and 1 for Undivided. Just to quickly breeze through these, there's the Winds of Chaos, which is a debuff to movement. It doesn't stop you from marching or charging, so I don't think this is worth doing. It is a long-range cast with a low casting value, but I'm still not super impressed. Acquiescent, a 12-inch hex which gives them strikes last. This is fine, but I think because of the short range of it, it's not something that I'm super willing to pick up. Fleshy Abundance is quite nice. It's a remains in play self spell, gives your caster and the unit +1 toughness. This can be comboed with Demonology really nicely, so this is something that's definitely worth picking up if you're looking at maybe a Knight bus. And then finally, there's the Blue Fire of Tzeentch, and this is the magic missile that I've alluded to. Cast on a 9, 18-inch range, but it's D6 +3, strength 4 hits, AP 2. And then flaming attacks, which is a negative, but this is going to rip through most things in the game. This is scary. It's even more likely to do a wound to you than a fireball is if you're a dragon because of that AP. So huge fan of that. Definitely something that I'm looking at picking up. So that's going to stop me from taking Lore Familiar on that caster. But looking at the arcane items, there is the immediate spell familiar here. This means that you get +1 known. It's not 1 per wizard, this is as expected, but for 15 points, it's extremely common. So you can take multiple of these in an army, and this means that you can have multiple casters casting with not only 5 spells known, because of the spell familiar, but +5 or better, because Mark of Tzeentch gives you +1 to caster if you're in your unit of unit strength 10 or higher. So it's very easy to get high casting rolls, high number of spells known. Your sorcerers are expensive, but the trade-off is you're one of the best casters in the game. Also, above the spell familiar, there is an item that is probably seen, you probably know it well. It's the Infernal Puppet, and for 50 points, you give it to a caster, and they have a 24-inch bubble of enemy wizards casting on 3d6, discarding the highest, which is pretty horrifying. That's not great, especially if they, combo it with something like Power Scrolls. They're rolling 4d6, 3 chances to roll a 1. It can be a real problem there. So, in my eyes, if you're playing Warriors of Chaos, the loadout for your first caster is Infernal Puppet and Spell Familiar. And then if you get to a second caster, depending on what you want them to do, you might take Lore Familiar. So if you're looking for a buffing caster, you might want to take Demonology or Dark Magic. At that point, you might take a Lore Familiar. In my eyes, you probably still just take the Spell Familiar, because that way you can go into Nurgle, give them the extra toughness as well. But there are other arcane items as well. Is there anything in the Arcane Journal that's worth taking? Grimoire of Ogvold is an interesting Lore Familiar plus. This is an item where you know all 7 spells from your chosen Lore of Chaos. Given the wording, and given how Lore Familiar has been FAQ'd, you can't then use this and change it into one of your signature spells. But you do know all 7 spells. I don't think there are any laws where I really like this, to the point where I take this over the cheaper Lore Familiar, but this is an option if for some reason there are 5 spells that you really want to have, or you want the flexibility, or you just have analysis paralysis and you don't have to make decisions on a day-by-day basis, so you just know that you've got all of your spells. Other than that, I do quite like the Tome of the Dark Gods as well. This is kind of an inverse Lore Familiar, in that you still have to roll your spells, but you can discard any number of them to pick up any of the spells from the Lore of Chaos as if they have the corresponding mark. So if you wanted, you could roll 4 spells and then go, actually, all of these are trash. I'm going to take all 4 signature spells. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but it has the option to do so. I really like Tome of the Dark Gods combined with a Spell Familiar. That's, I think, quite an interesting combination. You are unmarked, so you don't get the +1 to cast for being in a Tzeentch unit, but you're not always going to be doing that. You maybe don't want to take a Tzeentch Battle Magic caster and put them with Marauders. Maybe you want to have them buffing up a big unit of Knights, a bus of Chaos Knights, at which point Tome of the Dark Gods becomes a lot more interesting, because you've got flexibility there on a game-by-game basis. So yeah, I think I like this more than Lore Familiar. Beastmen. Now, Beastmen are the army that I would say, apart from Dwarves, are the most never-take Lore Familiar army in the game. You've got Viletide, which is an incredible spell. It's 5d6 strength 1 hits with no armor save allowed. You still take your ward and regen. It's a magic missile, cast an 15-inch range. This is so good. And part of the reason it's so good is there is an incredible arcane item that isn't extremely common that you're going to be comboing with it. There's also, now, if you wanted to go for a fun build as opposed to the most optimal, the Mantle of Gorok is an incredibly fun spell, which gives the caster and all of, the model, so I believe it applies to the mount as well, plus d6 modifier to their strength and attacks. However, if you roll a 6 as well, you lose a single wound instead of getting the additional attacks. This is obviously fun and funny, but maybe not the optimal way to do it. However, it does suffer from the Lore Familiar, because if you were playing this, you were probably going Demonology, going for Demonic Vessel, Demonic Vigor, maybe something else in there, and then also swapping into Mantle of Gorok. Now you're not able to do that, which is a little bit of a bugger. But if you're playing the sort of standard Beastman build, Viletide is the #1 spell. Just to really highlight what we're talking about here, Beastmen have some of the best arcane items in the game, but only one of them gets a look in, and that is the Hagtree Fetish. When you successfully cast a magic missile, reroll any failed rolls to wound, only 30 points. You're going to be taking Elementalism, you're going to be rolling, trying to get Wind Blast, using the other spells in there, maybe TMPing around, maybe giving a unit a ward save with Earthen Ramparts, but mostly you're looking for Wind Blast and you're looking for a second magic missile to go with your Viletide that you can reroll the wounds on. This thing is absolutely fantastic, and it means that Beastmen are a fairly good ranged army, even though it's only one model doing all of the heavy lifting. Speaking of arcane items being insane, just to highlight, the Plague Chalice is so interesting as well. If you roll any double while making a casting roll, it's cast as a perfect invocation, whether you cast the spell or not. However, if you roll a double 6, if you roll a perfect invocation, you suffer a strength 4 hit with no armor save allowed. At base, you're a T5 model, so you're being wounded on 5s. You can also sit in a chariot. Most of the time, you're going to be sat in a chariot. This is the opposite of Lady Elise. This is the, I want my spells to go off and I don't care who you are, you're not going to stop me. And then I take potentially some pain, but realistically, not anything. If you've got this on a caster on a chariot with a talisman of protection, the chance of taking a wound is pretty minimal. We're talking, 1 in 2 in 9? Something along those lines. Yeah, it's not much of a downside. But yeah, you never see this item taken because Hagtree Fetish is so good. So would I take a Lore Familiar for Beastmen? I would not. I would continue to do the Hagtree Fetish Viletide combo and just live your best life. Moving on to Tomb Kings, and we hit the first faction that I think really does suffer from this. The whole build, I think, for Tomb Kings generally hinges around being able to reserve move. Undead are really slow because they can't march, but if you've got an army-wide reserve move, which you can do through Kasar's Incantation of the Desert Wind, that lets you be honestly more speedy than you would be if you were just marching. If you've got lumbering, for example, you can do a couple of lumbering moves in there, various bits and pieces, open order, all of that good stuff. So it's really strong having a big bubble of reserve move, I should say. However, if you are playing a Tomb King army, you don't have a spell familiar, and there are spells that you specifically want to get. Now, does this matter if you're playing multiple casters? It matters less. You can get away with, I think in Mortuary Cult, you can get away with it. But I think it makes it a lot less of a strong build in terms of if you go for the Illusion caster, Spectral Doppelganger, because they're going to be on a dragon. They'd normally have the big command range, so you can get an 18-inch bubble of Incantation of the Desert Wind. This way round, you can't do that because you need the Lore Familiar to make sure you get Spectral Doppelganger. So I think there is a little bit of a conflict of choices there. The other spell that you might be picking is the Incantation of Cursed Blades. If you're playing some sort of poison shooting brick or lots of Ushabti, having rerolls of 1s to hit is really strong, especially when you've got a fixed ballistic skill to hit. So losing one of these 2 spells is actually a little bit of a nerf and a real shame for the Tomb King players. So it makes a big difference there. So with that in mind, you probably want to fit Lore Familiar into your Tomb Kings list. But if you're playing a second caster, or if you're going for that Illusion Caster build, or sorry, not going for that Illusion Caster build, then are there any items that really sort of make you double think about taking Lore Familiar? I really like the Canopy, Enkill's Canopy, 30 points to dispel all remains in play spells. I think this has lost a lot of value now that the Sisters of the Thorn remains in play, Pillar of Fire spam list is dead. So I think this has lost value, and now it's a little bit hard to justify putting in a list. The Hieratic Jar, this is a rising twice, but it's extremely common, so you could put that in on top of. And then the Scarab Brooch. Scarab Brooch is interesting. I don't hate it. It gives you extra range on your From the Beneath the Sands rule, where you're bringing things in from reserves fully within 12, becoming fully within 18 of a Lich Priest. They have to be fully outside of 6 inches of an enemy unit, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility there. So I don't hate that for 20 points. And if you're taking a caster that can't take Lore Familiar because they want to pick up that signature spell, this is one of the options available to you. Over to the Arcane Journal items, there's not really much in here either that makes me want to go non-Lore Familiar. The Fazaret's Canopy, 40 points, summon some skeletons, but they're skirmishers, so you can't even really use them to redirect well. You can redirect a little bit, but it's harder to do with skirmishers. There's the Curseweaver Wand, which is all well and good, +1 to casting rolls for attempting to cast hexes. That's not bad. But if you're taking that, you're going to have to roll your spells, so you might not even roll a hex, which is a little bit of a downside. And then you've got the tablets, which are extremely common and just adding to your cast rolls. But let's be honest, if you're playing Mortuary Cult especially, you don't need additional +1 to casts. You can just kill some scarabs and jobs are good. And so I think for me, Tomb Kings are an army that are actually hurt by this. They are one of the best armies in the game. They will probably continue to be one of the best armies in the game, but they lose just a little bit of reliability. And I think their build diversity gets squashed a little bit because it's harder to justify taking the reserve move or the lack of reserve move, on the Illusion Caster, if it's your only caster or if it's your general. That's wrapped up the Force of Fantasy, the Ravening Hordes, the main core book, but that does leave us with the Legacy factions. First of all, we've got the Chaos Dwarves, and unlike their Stony Brethren, they are actually able to buy magic items. So, in this case, would I take them? Well, first of all, looking at the items, I don't think there's really anything in here that particularly puts me off from buying Lore Familiar. However, there is a reason that you might not buy that, in that you can't stack a great armor save on a Sorcerer Prophet on a Bale Taurus. What you might want to do is you might want to go Meteoric Iron to give yourself a 5-up armor save that can't be reduced, Talisman of Protection for a 5-up ward save. That takes you to 50 points, and then instead of spending 30 points on a Lore Familiar, you could just roll the spells and take the risk on him, but in return, you can take a Mantle of Stone, and that takes you up to T7, which is a really nice defensive boost. Makes it so you can't die to Vile Tide, makes it so that you're much less likely to die to incidental damage. Great weapons often will be wounding you on 5s, so it's a really nice defensive package that you can put in there. That, for me, is the main reason not to go Lore Familiar. And there is also an absolutely killer spell that we'll look at in a second that is a reason not to go Lore Familiar as well. And here we are. Moving on to the spells, we've got the Storm of Ash. This thing is incredible. You can't stack it anymore. I think most people weren't doing that anyway, but the way it works is it's a self-range hex, it's a cast on a 10, and all enemy units within 9 inches of you suffer -1 to hit. So this is not attacks at things within 9 inches of you. So if you just full send your model, say your opponent's playing a gun line using ballistic skill guns, if that was the thing, you could just march your unit all the way up into 9 inches of all of them. They're all -1 to hit, even if they're shooting at things that are, in your battle lines as opposed to in theirs. So a really nice defensive buff. You can stack it with the Black Orc on Wyvern. If you've got that, then you've got probably the Effigy of Mork on it. Give it to -1 to hit in combat. It's weapon skill 7 already. Stack it with Storm of Ash. Suddenly, enemy Dragon Lord is hitting you on 6s, which is not particularly great. It's hard to do a lot of damage when you're hitting on 6s. Next up, we've got Demons of Chaos. Do Demons of Chaos want to buy Lore Familiar? No. Again, I refuse to elaborate further. Dark Elves, one of my absolute favourites. And I think I may have a slightly different opinion to some of you. A lot of Dark Elf players tell me that Black Horror is worth taking. I fundamentally disagree. I don't think that it's a good item, unfortunately. A good spell, I should say. So it is a 5-inch blast template vortex. You place it within 18 inches of the caster, so you can get it where you want it to be. However, it moves in a random direction. If it does hit you, the unit takes D6 strength tests, which is, fine. The things that you want to avoid having to roll to wound, typically have high strength, so it's not great. And you do lose a wound, but again, the stuff that's worth really getting that into is probably strength 4 or 5. So on average, you might do a wound, which is not particularly exciting. So I'm not a huge fan of it. Cursing Word exists as well. It's a remains in play hex, which remains in play we don't like because it gives your opponent a chance to dispel it. It's only a 12-inch range, so realistically, you're probably going to be in range to dispel it, although there is an interaction that we'll get into in a second that you might not be. But it's only -1 to either weapon skill or ballistic skill. There are situations where this is good. I don't take it typically. This is not a spell that I find value in, so for me, it's probably a miss. On to magic items, and this is why I think that Dark Elves may be the best casting army in the game. They've got a couple of great items. Blackstaff, 55 points, you get to roll an extra d6, but if you roll any double ones, you miscast. This is a little bit spicy, but it's like having a power scroll all of the time, and honestly, that's just good. That is solid. Mostly, I'm not taking Lore Familiar because of Tome of Furion. It's a spell familiar. It's +1 spell known. You cast at the same level. It's 15 points. It's not extremely common. Otherwise, I'd probably play around with comboing it with the Blackstaff. But, it's good. It's 15 points. 5 out of the 6 spells. Jobs are good. And you could swap into the signature spells if you want to, although I'm not. And then you've got the Focus Familiar, which is extremely common, so you can take it with a Lore Familiar, and this lets you place spells 12 inches further, which effectively means you can Pillar of Fire turn 124 inches. That's why I think they're so good at casting. So do I think that Dark Elves are a Lore Familiar army? Maybe. I think the way I have been playing them, which is Double Dragon, you don't have the points to take Lore Familiar, and that for me is the thing that's stopping me from doing it. I roll my spells. Sometimes I don't roll the spell that I want, and that sucks, but you've still got 2 dragons. I really like Tome of Furion. It's cheaper. You almost always get what you need. It's fine. And then the Focus Familiars as well. But if you're not playing Double Dragon, if you're playing a Sorceress on Pegasus or on foot or whatever, then yeah, I think Lore Familiar is a great buy for Dark Elves because, again, I'm not super worried about taking their signature spell. Lizardman. Now, do you take a Lore Familiar for Lizardman? I don't take a caster for Lizardman, so for me, it's a no, but it's not because of the item. However, if you decided you wanted to go down the Slan route, or even just a level 2, you probably do want to take a Lore Familiar for Lizardman. You look at the spells, and neither of the spells is a particularly good. Monsoon can do well. It can potentially... it blocks line of sight, that's good, but it moves in a random direction, so you can't rely on that in terms of keeping your models defended from, taking fire or charges or whatever. It does do damage. It prevents people from doing damage in the shooting phase. That's fine, but you're probably not getting it where you need it to, so I'm not super bothered about that. Apotheosis looks really good at first, but it's only infantry or cavalry, so you realistically can't heal. It's if you cast it at 12 or more, you heal D3 plus 1 lost wounds. There are no infantry or cavalry in the book that have 5 wounds, so Apotheosis just doesn't do anything, unfortunately, which is a shame. It does give them fear or terror if they already have fear, but for me, that's not cutting the mustard. I'm not really too bothered about taking that. So spells-wise, I'm not bothered. Take Lore Familiar. How about magic items? Is there anything in there that dissuades me from taking Lore Familiar? Not really. 2 of them are extremely common, so you can take multiple of them and you can stack them with Lore Familiar. The one that isn't the Cupped Hand's the old one. It's fun. It's 55 points on a 2+. If you miscast, your opponent take a small blast template, which is fine. You put it over a character. There's almost always going to be a character. Strength 6 AP2, so they're likely to take some damage. Or, the models around them, if they're in a unit, might take some damage. But this is probably not 55 points. This is too niche, I would say. And then Cube of Darkness is an incredible spell. Again, this is like the Canopy. It's less valuable now that the Sisters Pillar of the Fire spam build is dead. So I'm probably not looking at using Cube of Darkness, but you could take it with Lore Familiar if you wanted to. Or if you're only taking a level 2 for some magic defense, you might take this instead because that takes up your full magic allowance. But yeah, if you're playing Lizardman, you want to play a caster, Lore Familiar, absolutely fine. Go for it. Moving on to Ogres, and I think this is the most clear cut. Absolutely not. Do not risk it. Just, roll your spells and change one of them into one of these spells, because Troll Guts is absolutely fantastic. You can give a unit a 5-up regen. It lasts until your next turn, so it's not a remains in play. It's great. It's also a graduated casting, so if you cast it on an 8, you still get the 6-up, but if you make the better roll on an 11, you only need to roll a 7 on the dice. You're going to get Troll Guts. So for me, Lore Familiar, absolutely not. We'll just have a look at the items, but Troll Guts is by far and away enough to make me. And onto the arcane items, immediately we see the reason that maybe you wouldn't take it. There's some great items in here. So starting off with the Halfling Cookbook, you increase your command range, dispel range, and the range of a single spell by 3 inches. This is solid. This is really good. Dispel range increase. The command range and the spell range are not something that I'm super bothered about. If you're going with battle magic, let's say, you could roll Pillar of Fire, drop it 15 inches, that's fine, or you get a bit more flexibility on your arcane urgency, but it's mostly for the dispel range, which is really nice. Hellheart, again, is fine, you can heal a wound, and then if your opponent rolls any natural doubles they miscast, that's honestly, I'm surprised we don't see that more. That feels like a decent bit of magic defense that actually shuts down the Blaster Warriors of Chaos lists or the Mortuary Cult lists when they're throwing out a lot of spells. It can make them really concerned because a miscast is the easiest way to lose your entire casting phase. And then my favorite, Grut's Sickle. After making a casting roll, you use it to roll an additional d3 and add its results to the casting roll. However, a single friendly model within 3 inches loses a single wound. This is the best version of this rule in any variation I've seen. You do it after you've made the roll, so you know if you failed or if you're rolling low and you're worried that you're going to get dispelled, so you can add to it. You get D3 added to the casting roll. You only lose a single wound. This is great. And it's not necessarily self, it's any friendly model within 3 inches. So this is all just good stuff. I'm a really big fan of Grut's Sickle, and honestly, I'd be taking this over Lore Familiar, even if I didn't have the access to Troll Guts as well. Skaven. We all know there's no such thing as giant rats that live in the sewers, but if there were, would you take Lore Familiar on them? I think for me, Skaven is a list that lives and dies on its level 4 casters, so I'm probably always going to be taking a level 4 because I want to take a Demonology caster and I want to buff up whichever unit I really want to turbocharge the 9s. But that's not the only way to play Skaven. You might want someone who's a little bit of a blaster wizard, so maybe you're taking 2 level 4s and one of them's going to buff and the other one is just going to roll spells. At that point, maybe you don't, because you can swap into Warp Lightning, which is an interesting magic missile. It's a high casting cost on a 10, 18-inch range, and it's D3 plus 1 strength, 5 hits at AP3. So into some targets, this does real work. Sometimes you just do 2 hits, you roll a 1 and a 2, and you're like, oh, okay, I killed no Chaos Warriors, which is very sad for me. But it is a solid magic missile, if just a little high variance. Skitterleap is not a spell that I typically take, although there are some games where maybe you want to, and having the flexibility to do so is nice. And finally, Cloud of Corruption. Cloud of Corruption is pretty solid. It is a blast template, 3-inch, that doesn't move. It's a vortex. It's dangerous terrain, which blocks line of sight, and while within 3 inches, your enemy are at -1 toughness. So this is really solid if you're trying to put high volume of low quality into your opponent, which you might be doing with access to gutter runners, poison shooting, although the poison doesn't matter, but just sort of wounding with the rest of the shots. Maybe you're looking at rattling guns, or you've got into combat and you've got a large quantity of strength 3 or strength 4 attacks. -1 toughness can be quite nice there. And how about magic items? Well, these magic items are pretty solid. Storm Demon is a slightly worse version of the magic missile you could have used as a signature spell. Again, it's not extremely common, so you're buying this and then maybe going into taking that magic missile as well. So if you want to go more down the magic missile route, you can go with that. We've also got the Warp Condenser. This is a really solid item. Again, it's one of those great increase your dispel range by 3, and then your bonus here is you get +1 to cast magic missiles, which is fine. It's not super exciting, but it's fine. And you get to reroll your result on the miscast table, which can be pretty key. If you're going for pumping a lot of damage out with a range caster, being able to reroll that miscast if it all goes wrong is pretty solid, so I don't hate that. And then Warp Stone tokens, you get some of these natively on your level 4s. You can add D3 to the casting roll, then risk taking wounds. These are fine. These are solid, but again, they're extremely common, so it doesn't really matter, and you have them natively, so you might not buy anymore. So looking at this, I think it goes 2 ways. If I'm taking 1 caster, I'm taking 1 caster to do a specific job. If I'm taking 2 casters, I'm taking 1 caster to do a specific job, and I'm doing 1 caster to try and kill as much of my opponent's army as possible, while the rest of my army is, fodder for them to fall over. So I think there's definitely reasons to go both ways, and I'd say it depends on your playstyle, but for me, Lore Familiar first of all. Last but not least, we have probably the best casting army in the game, which is Vampire Counts. Move Over Slam, the Undead are in town. They have 2 signature spells that are really good, and then they've also got Raise Dead, which I'm not going to talk about. Hellish Figure, this is their version of the Shifting Sands. This is their reserve move. in my opinion, it's super important to have. Your general is probably going to be on a Mortis engine, which is a large target, so you get that 18-inch bubble of reserve move. You're casting it at a high value, so it's going to be working out for you more often than not. I think Hellish Figure is really fantastic. Van Hel's Dance Macabre is another great spell. This is something that you might want to swap into on a second caster if you've got one. It gives a target unit plus D3 modifier to one of the following stats. And the important stat in my eyes is often movement or weapon skill. Initiative can be important, but it's usually movement or weapon skill if you're going first. But it lasts until your next start of turn subphase, which is rare for a buff. Cast on an 8 or a 12, if you cast it on the higher value, what it means is you get 2 modifiers. So you always get what you need out of this if you're casting at a high value. And these two are fantastic spells, and you can really build around them. So in terms of taking Lore Familiar, I wouldn't do that. It's too much punishment losing out on these spells. Moving on to magic items, and for me, this really hammers home that you do not want to be taking Lore Familiar for vampire counts. First of all, Spell Familiar. Extremely common, 0 to 1 per wizard, but you get an additional spell per caster for 15 points. You're going to be casting at an additional +1 or maybe +2 because the Mortis engine that you're going to buy as your mount does give you an increase to your casting, which is obviously very solid. So you're effectively a level 5 wizard. And at that point, you don't really need to risk rolling for spells. Oh, sorry, you don't need to choose the spells. You can risk rolling for spells. Second of all, the other 2 magic items are both incredible in their own right. And if you've got 2 level 4s, which can be hard to fit in, I would recommend taking both of them. So there's the Skull Staff, 50 points, increase your dispel range by 3. You know that we like this. And you get +1 to dispel as well in, with a wizardly dispel. This is just a good item. Again, you can put it with the Spell Familiar. 65 points of arcane items there. Job's a good one. You can still take the Talisman of Protection on top of that. And then another good one is the Scepter of Denaro. 35 points, you can Invocation twice. You don't have any way of boosting up how many wounds you heal in a meaningful way into like dragons or anything like that, or Mortis engines. So a lot of the stuff you're healing, you're just going to be healing the flat amount that you would be healing according to the chart. Scepter means that you get to get another crack at it. And it also means, especially if you've got a BSB with an aura, BSB for undead let you reroll all leadership tests. If you've got 2 chances and 2 rerolls, you're pretty likely to get at least one of them off. Most of the time anyway, so this just gives you some real consistency with healing wounds, which for undead can be an absolute, make a real bonus. And if you've got those Blood Knights, you definitely want to get them back up to full. Last point of contention that I wanted to go through, and I thought I'd do this all together. I didn't want to do it sort of each army unit by unit. Some armies have multiple casters, so for example, if I was looking at Orcs and Goblins, I'd have to do the Orcs, then the Goblins, then the Night Goblins. I think it's worth having a look at how good the signature spell is for each lore. And honestly, there are a lot of stinkers. So I think we're going to be swapping into signature spells a lot less than we have been previously. The armies that are taking Lore Familiar, you might just take 4 spells from the lore a lot of the time. Battle Magic starts off with Hammer Hand. This is an aggressively fine spell. If you ever think that you're going to be wanting to get into combat, I quite like it. I play a caster on a dragon. I find that Hammer Hand adds just that little bit that I really like. It gives me a little bit of an output into the Green Knight, means that I'm less likely to get tied up by it forever. But if you're playing sort of your standard caster that just wants to be playing Keep Away, and that's really what this lore benefits from. You can see you've got 2 damage spells, you've got a movement spell, you've got a ward save, and then a couple of hexes. This is not necessarily a unit that wants to get in combat. So Battle Magic, maybe you're not picking Hammer Hand unless you're playing a very specific character. Demonology has one of the best magic missiles in the game. So if you're playing Demonology, you're probably happy to pick this one up. You've got a casting value of 9, 18-inch range, 2d6 strength, 4 hits at AP1. This is really solid. You look at the rest of the list, and it doesn't really gel with it, which is interesting. And I think it would be a problem if you did, but if you swapped the signature spells between this and Battle Magic, I think they'd fit thematically a lot better. So this is about moving infantry quite quickly, a little bit of debuffing, and then there's a couple of one assailment, 2 enchantments to buff up the unit that either you're in or you're next to, and then a vortex that we don't care about because vortexes don't really play in the game the way that they should at the moment. So for Demonology, if you're playing a Demonology caster, Lore Familiar, you're probably not upset to take a Magic Missile, although you might not find that you have all that much time to cast it in the earlier rounds. Maybe it's something that you end up using later on. Dark magic, this has another magic missile, but don't be alarmed. This is terrible. So if you're playing dark magic, you really probably want to be looking at your signature or just taking spells from within the lore. And unfortunately, the lore is a real mixed bag. You've got Word of Pain, which is fantastic. It's a really strong debuff. You've got Battle Lust, which is fantastic. It's a really strong buff. And then everything else is kind of mediocre. You can teleport a character, which is fine, but often not needed. You've got 2 assailment spells, and then you've got a magical vortex. This magical vortex is one of the worst ones, in my opinion. It is an AoE, but your opponent has lots of chances to stop it before it does anything meaningful. So I don't love this. I'm not a big fan. Maybe I'm missing some minutia here, and there is a great way to use it, but I haven't found that for me with dark magic. On to Elementalism, this is one of the worst. It is a debuff. You can make your opponent -1 movement and initiative. It's a 12-inch range hex. So, and remember, you cast hexes before you move. So realistically, if you're an Elementalism caster, you do not want to be taking this. However, in my mind, Elementalism is one of the laws that you really want to have Lore Familiar, because you're going for very specifically probably Plague of Rust, probably Earthen Ramparts, probably Wind Blast, probably TMP. You probably want all 4 of these spells, and then you really don't want Flaming Sword or Summon Elemental Spirit, because they're both kind of terrible. And you might have built your strategy around it. You might be using Travel Mystical Pathways to teleport a unit of shooting poisoned archers around. You might be needing Plague of Rust because you've got a lot of high strength but poor AP attacks. You're probably taking Elementalism because you have a very specific role for your caster, and this is a point where you might want to be looking at taking a Lore Familiar. Onto High Magic. I do not like Drain Magic. This is, in my opinion, a bad spell. Some people like it, but because it remains in play, and you have to be within range of the enemy wizard for it to take effect, they have a chance to dispel it, and there's no debuff to the dispel. However, it does raise the spell's casting cost of any wizard within 24 inches by 2. Not enemy wizards. Oh, sorry, it is enemy wizards, but it doesn't matter, because realistically, it's cast a 9. If they're a level 4, all they have to do is roll a 6 to dispel it. So that is approaching 2/3 of the time they're going to dispel this before you get any use out of it. So I'm not a big fan. If people were taking a lot of level 2 wizards and you were taking a level 4 and they weren't, I could see a use for it. But in this case, I don't think it's very good. The lore itself is, again, a bit of a mixed bag. I'm probably taking this because I have a specific role for it. I probably want Ethereal or to buff units with Fury of Cain, and everything else in there is, again, a mixed bag. Some things are better, some things are worse. So for me, this is another lore where you might go, actually, I quite like a Lore Familiar, or at the very least, no 5 spells, and really hope that I don't lose the one that I need. Illusion. This is one of the best Lore Familiar laws, and that's because Glittering Robe is really good. -1 to hit for any attacks made against the caster and their unit. It casts on an 8, it's range self, it's not a remains in play. This is a very strong spell. You do have to sequence it properly, because if you cast any enchantments on it before you cast Glittering Robes, you do lose the enchantments cast before, but just roll Glittering Robe first, then roll the rest of your enchantments. Jobs are good, not a problem there. The rest of the lore, again, this really is a lore that you want to have Lore Familiar. You're going very specifically for Column of Crystal, Spectral Doppelganger, and Maya's Bit Mirage. Everything else you're kind of whatever on. So this is a very easy one to go Lore Familiar, and then go for your 4th. Go for the Glittering Robes. And at that point, you're not really too sad about losing the lore-specific spells, because what you've got is so strong, with the exception of Tomb Kings. I'm sorry, Tomb Kings, it's a difficult time for you. Necromancy has the Dwellers Below, and it is an assailment. And not only is it an assailment, but it is a bad assailment. It's a 3-inch blast template that scatters D3 plus 1 inches, and anyone hit takes a Strength 3, AP 0 hit. And you only hit enemy models with it, which is fine. But for such an underwhelming output, you really wanted, something better than this. Maybe have it cast on a 3. I'm not sold. So this is a lore that you're probably looking at not taking a Lore Familiar, because you really want a better, signature spell. The spells itself, there are some good stuff in there. There's 2 spells that debuff leadership. So if you don't get one of them, if you've got a Lore Familiar, not a Lore Familiar, if you've got the ability to get a 5th spell, a Spell Familiar, then I'm not super worried about rolling on here, because you're always going to get at least one of the leadership debuffs. You really want both, but the quality of spells in here is pretty good. The only thing that I don't like too much myself is Deathly Cabal. A lot of the time, the caster is going to have a ward save already, and giving them terror is niche. It's not going to do a lot, but, you know, sometimes it's going to make a difference. But I think for me, Necromancy, I'm pretty happy to take the risk, roll my spells. War Magic. Getting to the end, this is the Orcs and Goblins one. They have an assailment, and honestly, this is one of the few armies where you might be happy to have your casters in combat. It does depend what you're going with. And, you know, the signature spells that you can get for Lore of Mork and Lore of Gork are pretty good. More so if we're talking specifically the Goblin spells, the Lore of Mork. But, you know, maybe you want to take those specifically so you're not taking the Lore Familiar. If this is your Orc caster and you've got a Goblin caster as well, great place to put Lore Familiar. And if you want to take this signature spell, it's fine. It's fun, which is valuable to Orc players. And it again scatters, but it's a large blast and it's strength 4, AP 1. The downside is it can hit your own stuff. So this is maybe not the most competitive choice, but it is something that you will have a lot of joy when you play. So that has value in it. The spells itself as well, there's a lot of really good ones in here. You probably want a Lore Familiar if you can get it on this lore, but if you can't, it's not the end of the world. Often you'll pair a level 4 with this lore and an Elementalism caster. The Elementalism caster is going to get the Lore Familiar to make sure you get TMP, and this time you're going to roll just 4 spells on your secondary caster. You're going to swap into one of the Lore of Mork spells with your Goblin, and you're going to go for, you know, Evil Sun Shining, try and get Bad Moon Rising. Just get the good spells in here, but there's enough good stuff in here that honestly, whatever you roll, you're probably okay with the exception of maybe Hand of Mork, because you might not need to move your characters at all the whole game. That's it. That is everything. There was more to cover than I initially thought, honestly. And that was sort of my thoughts as to whether I would be putting Lore Familiars in my armies for any of the armies that we play here, and also trying to walk you through the decision-making process to help you decide whether you want to take it. Let me know. Are you off Lore Familiar? Is it the way that you've been playing Lore Familiar the whole time and you don't care about the change because you've been playing it that way anyway? How have you been playing it? Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.